together to pour wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will ye go, lassie, go?
Hi, good morning. Here we are at Wardlaw Mausoleum, family mausoleum of Clan Fraser, and we're very privileged to have Erik Lundberg to take over the job of giving us the history of the place. So thanks to Erik for sparing his time.
Good morning. Right, so you're at Wardlaw Mausoleum and Wardlaw Graveyard, the home, the burial place of the Lovat Frasers. So our building behind us here was built in 1634 when the Lovats no longer had access to purely private burials, it being unroofed following the Protestant Reformation. It was built onto the end of the Wardlaw Parish Church, so these low walls here are the remains of that church, built itself in 1221. Our building started off very plain but was remodelled by Simon the Fox, our most famous Lord Lovat, in 1722 when he was at the height of his powers, having supported the Hanoverians during the 1715 as a means of being recognised as Lord Lovat. He raised the roof, made the windows taller, added the belfry and the very fine monument inside, which is to his father Thomas, who was briefly Lord Lovat in the 1690s. Thomas is actually buried at the graveyard for Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye. Simon had a very complicated life, a very long life, full of incidents and intrigue, one must say. Come the 45, he had fallen out with the Hanoverians and supported the Jacobites. When Charlie landed without the expected army, Simon was very hesitant and stayed home with all his men. The prince goes off south, has the very unexpected victory at Preston Pans and moves on into England. Simon wants to hedge his bets, so he sends his son, the Master of Lovat, out with half his men, but immediately writes to Lord President Forbes at Culloden House saying, "My terrible son has stolen my soldiers." Isn't that shocking? He will do all it takes to keep himself at liberty in the hope that the prince's cause will win out in the end. The son is with the prince back up from Derby to Falkirk, where he took part in the battle there, and up to Culloden. Although the Master of Lovat was not present, we believe, at the battle itself, he was here in the Aird, picking up the rest of the Fraser fighting men to add to the Jacobite army. Battle lost, father and son meet up at Gorthlick House on the south side of Loch Ness, one of the Fraser properties. There they are joined by the prince and his party in the evening. They give him food but are unable to persuade him to carry on the campaign. The prince will leave and head off west, eventually getting a ship back to France. Young Simon gets himself into the government at Fort Augustus, but old Simon knows if he does that, he is dead, and he spends several months wandering the Highlands trying to avoid capture, ending up on an island in Loch Morar on the west coast. There he is chased off the island by the British Navy and is eventually captured at a settlement called Meebo on the edge of the loch. He's taken to Fort William, down to Edinburgh Castle, and then moved on to London for trial in Parliament for treason. This happens in Westminster Hall, the same place that still can be visited today, and there he is found guilty of treason and sent back to the Tower of London to await execution. 9th of April 1747, he is taken up to the Tower and there's a big public party, a public holiday he was given to celebrate this great event. There he is beheaded with a single stroke of the axe. Both the axe and the block can still be seen in the Tower of London Museum. Simon was taken up from Tower of London to the awaiting scaffold at the Tower of London. And it's a big public day out, fun for all the family. And there was, just like today, there would have been grandstands of seating built around the perimeter. Unfortunately, one of those grandstands was built a bit too close to the moat for the Tower of London, which at that period was full of very stinky water, and it collapsed, killing many Londoners and injuring many more. It is said Simon was very amused that they were dying when they came to watch him die, and was still laughing as the axe comes down on his neck. giving rise to the phrase, laughing your head off. To my best endeavours, this is the origin of the phrase from that period, but I really don't think Simon would have said that. He was far too cultured a man. And actually, he was recorded as having rehearsed two very elegant Latin phrases to be remembered by. The main one I recall is Dulci et decorum est pro patria mori. It is a great thing to die for one's country, because he saw himself as a patriot, whatever the Hanoverians might say about him. The body is then returned to the family, and there the intrigue begins really, because officially he was taken back off the family and indeed buried under the floor of the chapel inside the Tower of London, St Peter ad Vincula, and there he officially lies. But Clan Fraser was told that they managed to swap the bodies, and he was brought home and rests in his own mausoleum in the crypt that he designed for that very purpose. Over time, that coffin was interfered with because the clan assumed that was correct. It was him inside it, and therefore certain artefacts inside the coffin were removed, and most importantly, the head. Young Simon, the Master of Lovat, eventually gets released under amnesty, becomes a lawyer, helps out Clan Campbell in the case of the Appin murder as the first step in his efforts to get back into the good graces of the Hanoverians. A few years later, he forms the 78th Fraser Highlanders to fight under the British Army in their ongoing war with the French in North America, and is present especially at the Heights of Abraham. That one's unsuccessful, and he comes back as Colonel Fraser of Lovat. 10 years on, the British Army again needs more soldiers, and he forms the 71st to fight in the American Revolution. This time he's too old to go personally, and other Frasers command the regiment. It was present at the last major battle at Yorktown, where the British Army has to surrender to the Americans, and that's kind of game over. He comes back to Britain and fights again in Spain and Portugal, retiring as a Lieutenant General. And as a reward for all his good efforts to the Hanoverians, he is rewarded by allowing to get or buy back the family estates which had been confiscated after the 45. He lived in what was the old surveyor's house, which was eventually refurbished and extended, and really is the current Beaufort Castle. He died with no children, and the estates passed to his half-brother Archibald. He had 5 children, but sadly they all die young. So when Archibald dies 1815, there are no more Frasers in the male line, legitimate ones at least. The estate therefore passes to the Frasers of Shrickan from Aberdeenshire, and after a very long and involved court case, they are confirmed as the rightful inheritors. They take over the estate, and it's their descendants that then rebuild Beaufort Castle. The family have now got back up to the top levels of British society, and come the Boer War in 1800, they form the Lovat Scouts. The Scouts fight both in the First and the Second Wars, and in the Second War, then Lord Lovat leaves them and forms commandos, and very famously lands on Sword Beach on D-Day with his piper Bill Millen, who walks out of the landing craft and manages to avoid not being captured or shot dead. Both of them survived a very long life. But in 1970s, I believe Lord Lovat had a heart attack and very wisely perhaps passed the whole estate to his son, so that if he did die, the state would avoid inheritance taxes. This worked out, but sadly in 95, both his youngest son and oldest son were to die within a week of each other. This meant that the Master's own son, the current Lord Lovat, became the new heir, and when Lord Lovat died, then he becomes the new Lord Lovat. Sadly, the debts on the estate meant that the castle and half its lands had to be sold. The family are still living in the area and are taking a strong part in the community in Bewley, so we have great hopes for them. Back here at Wardlaw, when the new Stricken family took over, the building was really kind of full and old and wasn't really theirs, so they never used it. They went away and built their own new Catholic parish church at Eskdale, about 10 miles to our west. Beautiful building, most recently restored. Our building, as a consequence, falls into a bit of a ruin and becomes really a nice building in the landscape, and indeed the local children's play park. There had been no such thing at that time. In 1990, it was purchased by the community for £1 and then restored in 97-98 for £500,000. Since then, we had some guests, but it wasn't really until the arrival of Outlander that its fortunes really took off. And we have been delighted to welcome many guests as part of an Outlander tour since then. And we hope to do again as soon as the current COVID restrictions are relaxed.